Okay, it is 1:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Candice Miller. I am an extension horticulture educator. I serve 6 counties in the northwestern corner, Joe Davies, Stevenson, Winnebago, Boone DeKalb, and Ogle. I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I did my bachelor's in horticulture and I did my master's in ag education. And while I was in college, I worked in greenhouses, but one summer I also was able to help with a summer garden camp, which is a really great experience. And it kind of opened my eyes and kind of sparked that interest in youth gardening. So since starting as an extension educator, I've kind of continued with that and tried to kind of research that topic some more and get involved in that. So that's why I'm here today to hopefully give you all some ideas about how to start a youth garden if you've never worked with one before. Or if you're already maybe working with a youth garden, maybe you'll get a couple of tips and tricks included in there as well. So today we're going to talk about some of the benefits of youth garden. We'll talk about how to get started from the ground up. We'll talk about some tips for getting the youth engaged in the garden, getting them interested, and then we'll finish up with just some tips for success that we have learned through some of the gardens that we've done in our unit. So we'll go ahead and get started here. We'll take a break about halfway through for questions, and then we'll do more questions at the end, obviously. Okay, so I said we'll start out first with the benefits of youth gardening, and there's really a lot of great benefits. And when I say youth gardening, for me, a lot of it has been school gardens in particular is what we've gotten a lot of requests for help for. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a garden at a school. It could be youth that are involved with a community garden. It could be a garden at a food pantry. So really, it could be any type of garden that has a youth component to that. And there's a lot of studies, a lot of research that's shown a lot of great kind of factual data that shows some of these benefits for getting youth involved. Obviously, a lot of it's common sense, but we also have a lot of good data to back that up as well. Obviously, one great thing is that we can get the children to start to connect with nature, especially some of those more urban kids where they maybe don't have that availability to be able to go out into a natural setting and learn that aspect. Giving them access to some type of garden would really help them gain that connection. And I'm sure a lot of us know too that a lot of kids just simply don't know where their food comes from. They get it at the grocery store, but they have no idea before then how that plant's actually grown, who grew it. So especially a vegetable garden can really help open the eyes of a lot of youth and help them learn where that food is actually coming from. And we'll talk later about how it's important, I think, to make sure that they're seeing the process the whole season. So they're seeing that garden from when they started that seed all the way through when they harvest it, and then being able to utilize it as well through cooking and various other things. That really helps make the connection between the whole process there. Okay. And of course, there's lots of different subject matters that we could bring into youth gardening as well. There's a lot of teachers that we've worked with, and a lot of have shown interest in youth gardening because they can really incorporate a lot of their lessons into it. Obviously, math and science are very easy. You can calculate how much produce you produce. You can do various experiments in the garden to bring that science in. But then you can also talk a lot about of the historical aspects of gardening when you're using your history lessons. We'll talk about some theme gardens later that bring in a lot of different books that youth will read and how you can kind of tie the garden into that. So almost any subject that you could think of that youth are learning in school, there's probably some type of gardening activity that we could relate that to, which is a really great way to kind of make that connection with the garden, and I think which is very important. So next slide, on to slide number 4. Some other benefits, of course, physically, we're getting the kids out there, they're getting exercise, they're learning motor skills when they're weeding, they're harvesting, they're hoeing. They're doing all of these different skills that they wouldn't necessarily be able to do in another environment. We're also giving them a sense of responsibility. I'll talk later about getting the youth engaged and giving them maybe a small portion of the garden that they are responsible just themselves. And it really helps connect them to the garden, that they have their own little plot that they are responsible for. And of course, the healthy food choices. That kind of goes back to where does the food come from, and being able to show them how is it started from seed all the way to how do we harvest it, and then how do we actually cook it? What's it taste like? And we'll talk about some taste testing ideas later. And then a couple other observations that some of my coordinators have made. Some of the life skills that they've noticed youth gaining are things like focus, patience, teamwork, cooperation, social skills. They really start to work together really well in a garden setting. So that's just a small list of some of the benefits that I've seen and that we've seen in our unit. But of course, others are going to have other ideas of things that they've been able to notice as benefits. So there's really a lot of great things about being able to start a youth garden, of course. Okay, so next slide, on to number 5 here. If you've never started a youth garden before, I kind of put together a list of steps here to try to make it the most successful for you. And the first of those steps is to really get the support of the place where you're going to be putting that garden, whether it's a school that you're going to put the garden in, or whether it's a food pantry that you're going to put a garden, a church possibly. You really want to get the support of the location, because obviously it's their location. They're gonna have it on their property. They're gonna be liable for a lot of different things. So you want to make sure you really have their support and their backing when you choose that location of where you're going to go with that. If it's a school, you want to make sure you have the support of the principal or the superintendent or whoever's going to be running that, because that is going to make your life a whole lot easier. You're going to have a lot more support and backing from your organization that way. Okay, and along with that, when you're getting that support, you want to make sure that you have the support of others as well. That you're really finding the key people. We've noticed that with a lot of the youth garden projects we've seen, the ones that are the most successful are the ones that have kind of a garden champion, someone who's really taken a strong interest in that garden, who's going to be responsible for it, who's going to make other people responsible and get people involved. And as extension, that can't really be us. We are really there to provide the education and to help get them started, but they really need that local support on the ground who's going to be able to continue the success of that garden. So it's really important to find those people before you get started. If there's no support of the community, there's no volunteer base, there's probably not going to be a whole lot of success with that garden. So you really need to find those key people. And then you want to determine, well, who is going to use this garden and how is it going to be used? Are you designing this garden as a teaching tool? If it's a school garden, maybe you're creating this tool so that there is a space for teachers to use for their lessons. Another use could be, as I mentioned, with food pantries. This could be a garden that you're putting at a food pantry that the produce is going to go directly to the food pantry. That might be the use. It could be a garden where you have master gardeners lined up to do it. You have educators who are going to be available to help use that garden. So you really want to make clear what your purpose is when you are setting up that garden as well. So you know who's going to be involved and what's going to happen to the produce, how is it going to be used, things like that. Okay, all steps to get started. The next slide then, along with number 6 here, who and how, is also when. With school gardens, it gets a little bit tricky. because obviously most schools are not year-round, so the students are not there during the summer. So in some cases, that garden can go left for the summer. There may not be anyone there to tend to it, to water, to weed, to harvest, to do any of that. So you really want to think about the timing for that garden. If it is a school garden, maybe you just think about planting some of those spring crops, letting it kind of go dormant for the summer, and then maybe planting some more fall crops in the fall once the kids are back in session. If there's no volunteers for the summer, that may just simply be your only option. But if you have the opportunity to have help the whole growing season, then that's great. Then you could use that the whole season. But we'll talk about some ideas for how to manage that coming up. And then lastly, once you've gone through all those hurdles, that planning, you want to figure out, well, what's our precise site and how are we going to lay out that garden? And on to the next slide, here is site selection in particular. If you've ever chosen a site for a vegetable garden or a fruit garden, it's going to be pretty much the same process as choosing a site for that. We're going to want a full sun location for most things. That's going to give us the most production for most of our fruit and vegetables. A nice, well-drained soil. Just like with any new garden you're starting, it would be great to get a soil test so you know what kind of nutrient levels you're starting with, as well as if it's in a previous maybe urban area where there's been maybe a factory and there's maybe a potential for contamination. A soil test would also be very important in that case, especially if you're going to be using that with youth. Okay. Along with full sun, you want to keep it away from any trees and shrubs because that's going to provide some shade to the garden, and most of our fruits and vegetables are not going to appreciate that. And for your convenience, you're going to want it in a convenient location. So if it's for a school, you're probably going to want it fairly close to the school so that it's easy for the kids to come out and to be able to utilize that garden, and ideally close to a source of water. That's going to make your life a lot easier than having to lug that water back and forth to the garden. You'll have a lot better success if you have an easily accessible water source. And then lastly, too, we also want to try to make it suitable to the landscape. Obviously, we want it to look nice. That's not probably our top priority, but we do still want it to add to the landscape of the school, of the church, or wherever that garden is located. So we do want to think about aesthetics as well. And we'll talk about some different materials that you could make those beds out of as well. So on to our next slide, number 8. Once you have that site, you need to decide how large you're going to want that actual youth garden to be. And that could be however large or however small you think is going to work for your location. If you have a very small group of youth, you're probably only going to need maybe one raised bed or a couple raised beds. You're not going to need a large garden. But if you have a large maybe daycare or a large YMCA group that's going to be using this youth garden, you might think about going for a larger size. So it really depends on the space you have available. If you're limited in space, you're probably going to go for maybe containers or a small number of beds. You're also going to think about what type of plants you want to put in there. What type of vegetables do you want to grow? What type of fruit do you want to grow? That's going to make a difference in how much space you need for that garden. Also, the amount of time you want to spend. If you're limited on the number of volunteers that are available or the number of people to help, you're probably going to go smaller so that that's not overwhelming for those small number of people that you do have to help. So you want to consider the amount of time and the amount of help that you have there. And then obviously the financial support. How much funds or how much backing do you have to actually be able to build the beds, to buy the supplies? That's going to obviously make a difference in what type of size you have as well. Okay. So next slide here, would be an example of where maybe you're limited on size. This was a courtyard of a school that wanted to put in some raised garden beds. So obviously in a courtyard they have a limited amount of space, so we were only able to put a certain number of raised beds in there. And we also had to take into consideration, well, where is the sun going to be at various parts of the day. So we can only put our sun-loving things on this side and our shade-loving on one side. So sometimes you are limited in a closed type of space where you really have to plan out how you're gonna do those things. On to slide number 10 then. We can talk about, well, what kind of containers. You saw in that last photo, those were just simple boxes used to create raised beds. And raised beds are really great for a lot of youth gardens. It's really great, makes it a little bit easier to access for the youth. It's a little bit more at their eye level when you raise it up a little bit, but it also makes it easier for us as adults because we're able to get down there a little bit easier as well. We can also have better control over the soil. So let's say you do get a soil test and you find out maybe your soil is not so great at this location. Being able to build a raised bed and then bring in your own soil from wherever source you can get it, that's going to give you a lot more control over the type of soil that you're able to bring in. You can make sure it's a good quality dark soil, high with organic matter, and you can also make sure it's free of any contaminants or anything like that. So it really gives you better control. And because of that, since you're bringing in soil, you're also elevating it, so you're also providing some better drainage to those beds as well. So it's a really great growing environment for a lot of our popular fruit and vegetables, which is great. Okay. In terms of material, you saw those last beds were made out of wood, and really whatever type of material you can get your hands on a lot of times is probably what you're going to use. Whatever is available to you at an affordable price could be utilized as long as it's a safe material. Okay, you always want to make sure you're taking into consideration, has this material been treated anything that could be a contaminant? For example, things like railroad ties that have been treated with creosote, we would want to avoid. Nowadays, the treated woods the studies have been shown to be safe, but older treated woods we would want to avoid. Pallets are a popular building material, but again, we want to think about what's it been treated with and what has been on that material previously, because that could easily be taken up by some of our vegetables. So safety, of course, is the first concern. But beyond that, anything from woods to cinder blocks, large horse troughs, any type of containers would really work to make a raised beds. And you can really get creative with a lot of the different materials when it comes to raised beds. Even old refrigerators, pop bottles, tires. There's a lot of different recycled materials that could be used to make beds out of. And that really makes it interesting for the youth as well. If you use something a little bit different, a little bit colorful, that really helps catch their eye in the garden too. Okay. So on to our next slide here, number 11. So I mentioned it could be just about any size, and like I said, it's really what you have available. This was a school this was the summer of 2012. As you can see, the grass is relatively dead because it was a drought. He probably did not have a great soil in this area near his school, so he just simply took some 5-gallon buckets and turned those into containers for his tomatoes. Now, obviously, he would probably have to water these quite often because they would dry out fairly quickly, but he was able to provide this to the kids at his school for a very low cost, and he was able to do that for his school without too much expense. Similar thing with grow boxes. Those are a popular gardening tool for youth gardens as well as for any type of garden. Makes it relatively easy to grow a lot of things in there. There is, of course, some expense to those type of grow boxes, but you can also find lessons online about how to make your own simple kind of self-watering containers too. So you can also get kind of handy with some of those containers. Okay. Next slide here. Here would be another example of just a nice wooden raised bed. You can make this, again, at whatever height is going to be the best for your garden. So that first wooden one I showed you was just only 1 plank high. These are about 2 planks high, so it elevates it even a little bit more. These were very easy to access by the youth in that garden. Very easy to build. The teachers actually built the raised beds for this garden, which was excellent. Next slide, then you can go even higher. This is more of a community garden setting where they have people renting and utilizing each space here. But you can just see how you can really tailor those raised beds to whatever your youth. Obviously, if you had young youth that you were working with, this would start to get a little bit high for some of them. But for older kids, this would be a perfectly accessible height for that. And it looks nice too, so it's really adding nice aesthetic value to the garden as well. Next slide here. This was another school garden that got started in our area, and they actually had a really great idea to partner with the cement company down the road, and they were actually able to have the cement company use their leftover cement at the end of the day. They would pour it into these forms for them, and then they were able to deliver these to the school, and they created these really unique raised beds out of that. So it really adds a lot of aesthetic value to that. They were able to get it free, basically, and it's a really unique way to do that. So think about who you can partner with in your area as well, and see if there's anyone nearby that would be able to provide some materials, donate materials, things like that. Okay, and then, like I mentioned, old refrigerators. So just about any material you could utilize to create a raised bed out of, whatever you have handy. Okay, on to our next slide here. We're on number 16, talking about the layout. So once you have those beds created, then you can start to think about how are you going to lay this out? What are you going to put in the garden? And this is where it's really important to plan with the youth in mind and get them involved in the process. It's really helpful to have them get some ownership in that layout. So one of the activities for your garden group could be actually designing the layout for the garden, deciding what they want to grow, what they like to eat, and then basing your layout on that. And I talked about giving them that responsibility, and that's when you could think about square foot gardening, which is a popular trend right now, where you block the garden off into individual squares. You could potentially have a student responsible for each specific square foot, have them weed that area, have them harvest that area, and it really gives them that sense of responsibility over their just small little aspect of the garden, which really is really important. When you're doing that layout, also think about, we talked about size. Bigger is not necessarily better. You want to make sure that you have enough labor, enough people to help manage that garden so that you're not going too large. Think about leaving some space for learning. Make sure you have some open areas where the youth can sit down if you need to talk to them about something, if you need to demonstrate something. Make sure you have enough space between the raised beds so that the kids are able to circle around and they're able to get through the garden easily, as well as making sure it's handicap accessible. Make sure you have lots of hands-on interaction design into that garden. And then we're going to talk about plant selection and talking about having lots of different flowers, lots of colors, lots of veggies. So you want to think about what plants you're putting in when you're designing that layout. Okay, next slide to number 17. Also think about, we're really trying to create a world of enchantment and magic, and one way to do that is to create mazes, to create arbors, tunnels, anything you can do that's kind of exciting for the youth and gets them engaged into the garden. So you can plant sunflower seeds in a circle, in a square, in some type of shape that once they grow up, They kind of create a little bit of fort so that kids can go in inside around those sunflowers, and it creates a place where they can read or they can just kind of sit and hang out. Same with mazes. You can plant corn or various other vegetables and create paths throughout there that the kids can walk through. And similar to the forts, you can do a similar thing with beans, where you can create a teepee with bamboo or some type of trellis material, and you can grow your beans up those supports so that they, again, create kind of a fort or a tent that, again, the youth can go into. They can read, and they can just kind of have their own kind of secret hiding place in the garden, which is a really great way to get them engaged. Next slide here is the plants. This is kind of my favorite part of designing a youth garden, is trying to figure out what plants would be really interesting to put in a garden. What would the kids really like? And one great thing to do that before you start any of that is to figure out, well, what are the kids actually going to enjoy? There's no sense in planting a kohlrabi if the kids are not going to eat a kohlrabi. But when I say that, we also too want to make sure that we are planting some unique things, and we're making sure we show them that whole process. Once we harvest it, we can have our nutrition educators, we can have our SNAP Ed educators, anyone who's great at cooking and kind of working with youth, we can have them then show the kids how to utilize that vegetable. And taste tests are a great way to do that. So maybe before you select some of those plants, do some taste tests with the kids and figure out what would they actually like to eat. And then obviously there's a lot of great activities related to that with taste tests. We've done there's SNAP Ed activity where you can create different animals out of cut vegetables, and then your dip you have there as well. Or another I Think Green activity where you're creating the butterfly out of edible materials as well. So there's a lot of things you can do with taste tests too to get youth involved in the garden. Okay, next slide. Some more about some interesting plants. I think it's really important to choose interesting varieties, especially when you're doing your fruits and vegetables, so that, again, you can kind of get the kids' attention, get them engaged, show them something different that they maybe not have seen before. So choosing some of those interesting varieties, like the Kyogia striped beets, which have a really cool striping inside when you cut them. There's lots of really cool colored carrots. Purple haze is a purple colored one. Dinosaur gourds would be really cool to grow because the outside skin of those gourds resembles a dinosaur. So that'd be really cool for the boys in the garden. And then, of course, there's lots of great sensory plants that would have really great smells to them, like chocolate mint, for example. So think about choosing some things that are going to have really great fragrances. They're going to be an interesting variety. And also think about things too where you can just take the kids out to the garden and they can kind of taste things as they go. That's going to be a really great thing to show them when you go out in the garden. And I will share with you at the end, I have a resource that has a list of some other great varieties as well. So I'll share that at the end. Okay, next slide here, some more about selecting plants. Think about the seasonality. So I mentioned if it's a school garden where there's no one around in the summer, then you might think about some of those early spring crops that they can be able to grow and harvest before school's out. And then they can plant some more once they come back to school and be able to harvest those before winter. So think about some of those cool season crops. And there's a really great seasonal chart that the Department of Ag puts out, I believe. It's called Illinois What's in Season. And it's nice and colorful, but it shows the ranges of when all the popular fruits and vegetables are actually in season. So you can look at that and kind of get an idea of what might work for the schedule that you have in the garden that you're going to be working with. Okay. The next slide here, a little bit more about that whole seasonality issue. So again, I'm going to share you a reference at the end that I put together for school gardens in particular, and it has this information in there. Again, focusing on those cool season things. If it is a school garden, you could think about planting some of these very hardy vegetables in the spring, and you could actually plant them 4 to 6 weeks before that average last frost date. So there's really quite a few things that you can get started in those gardens in the spring, and some of them be able to harvest before school is out. And then obviously too, you can plant those in the fall, 6 to 8 weeks before the average first frost. So those are our very hardies. Those you can plant 4 to 6 weeks early. And then on the next slide here, you have some that are a little bit less cold tolerant. These are frost tolerant vegetables. So these you would plant about 2 to 3 weeks before that average last frost. And then in the fall, we would plant these 8 to 10 weeks before the average first frost. So when you're planning out those gardens, you can look at these lists and try to figure out, well, what can I plant really early, what can I plant really late, and so on, so that you're able to get the kids out in the garden pretty early, and you're able to have them see that whole process from seed to harvest before the school year has ended, hopefully. Okay. Next slide here. It doesn't have to be all about vegetables either. I've talked a lot about fruits and vegetables because that's very common in gardens, obviously. But it doesn't have to be all about the produce. It could also be things that have other uses for the kids. I mentioned a sensory garden where you have lots of different smelling things that they can go around and sense, lots of different touch things they can touch, a lot of different colors that they can see. So not necessarily all about the produce. For example, here's a short list of things that would be great touching plants, really touchy-feely plants. So things like lady's mantle, which is a perennial that has a really soft, fuzzy leaf. Lamb's ear, another perennial, has a nice fuzzy silver leaf. If you'd like that lamb's ear to not be quite as aggressive, you could choose cultivars of that, like Helene von Steen, for example. Tends to have a little wider leaf and tends to be a little bit less aggressive than our species of Stakes. Sensitive plant is a great youth plant because when you touch the leaves, they fold closed, and kids really get a kick out of that. And then also silver sage would be another nice annual foliage with a really fuzzy leaf. So this next slide here, here's a picture of our Salvia argentea artemis, the silver sage. So you can just see in the picture how fuzzy and pubescent that leaf would be. So it'd be really great for youth to grow through and be able to touch that surface. Next slide here, number 25. Another thing you can do when selecting plants is to choose edible flowers too. Kids really get a kick out of that because they don't think about, well, we're eating the fruits, we're eating the vegetables, but when do we actually eat flowers? And there's a couple things you could think about there. Marigolds, Tagetes tenuifolia, would have a nice edible flower. Nasturtiums have a really nice peppery flower when you eat that flower, as well as pansies. So you could grow some of these things in a youth garden and be able to just have the kids walk through, pop some flowers as they're going through, and that can be really exciting for them. Okay, I'm going to take a break right here for any questions right now. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box or just let them out, or you can wait till the end.
There you go. This is we've got a question in Champaign.
Okay.
Do you have to worry with any of these common flowers that you suggested about children with allergies?
That might be something to take into consideration. Yeah, most of these things shouldn't be too much of an issue. But if you were, say, running a day camp or some type of gardening camp, I would probably find that information out from the parents just in case. But if it's a public gardening session that you're planting, none of the ones I'm talking about should cause that I can think of would cause any type of skin irritation in most people. Good question. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and move on then, and we'll have more question time at the end. So we're on to slide 26 now. So we've kind of talked about the process of getting started, planting, choosing your plants, all of that. Now we'll talk a little bit about getting youth engaged in that garden. And one way I think is great to do that is to choose theme gardens. Every kid knows what pizza is, but most kids don't know what's in the pizza, what's grown in the pizza come from. So you can choose some of those things that it's really common and that the youth are really going to know and to be able to identify with, and then turn that into a garden to kind of get them engaged in that. So here we have a salsa garden. That's one example. You could plant the vegetables that would be associated with salsa, like basil and tomato and onion and so on, whichever ingredients you'd like in your salsa. And then on the next slide here, you can think about doing some book examples. Stone soup would be an example. You could plant the vegetables that would be associated with that story. Peter Rabbit's Garden, Hungry Hungry Caterpillar, any type of book that you could think of to bring plants associated with it. That's a great thing. And then, of course, you could take the youth into the garden and read that book along with that garden, and then they can harvest that and make the actual product at the end. So again, it's all about from seeding all the way through tasting. A fairy garden is the next one here. Again, those are very popular with gardeners right now, but also kids would love that as well. So you can even do some activities where you create little houses out of popsicles. They create all of the kind of little tchotchkes that you add into the fairy garden, and then you would plant some plants associated that they think would go along with that. So fairy gardens is another idea. On the next slide is a pizza garden. Again, every kid knows what pizza is, so that's a great way to get them engaged in there. And then, of course, signage. Signage is really important. These were from a youth garden in Colorado, and they had some really cute garden signs that the kids had made to go along with the gardens. And I think that's important too, making sure we're labeling it so the kids know what they're actually growing. So on to slide 30 here. Here's a short list of some various theme gardens that you could go with. This is just a short list. There are so many out there, and obviously you could create your own type of theme gardens. Just choose your theme and then choose the plants that might be associated with that. And it's just a great way to get kids engaged. On to slide 31 here. A couple other things when you're trying to get youth involved in that garden. Make sure you have them involved in all aspects. So I mentioned having them help with the layout. That's a great way to get them involved in the planning process of the garden. Maybe having them help you decide what materials you're going to use, how are we going to decorate it, are we going to paint it, all of that. Have them help with the planning. Have them help with the planting. Making sure they're actually out there planting the seeds, they're planting the transplants so that they get that whole process. And then during the season, making sure we're showing them how to maintain. So we're showing them how to weed, how to water, all of those processes that us as gardeners would do on a daily basis. And then, of course, we're showing them how to harvest. When is the proper time to harvest all of these things? And then making sure we're showing them how to use it. So doing some taste testings, making some recipes with the things that they've harvested. Again, it's all about that full circle, all the way from planting all the way to eating, so that they really understand where that food's coming from. Next slide then, incorporating lessons related to what you're growing. So it's one thing to get that garden out there, have it planted, it looks pretty, but if there's no kind of education associated with it, you're losing a big opportunity there. So that's where us as master gardeners and as educators, teachers, anybody can really help with the education, being able to take some of these lessons and really get the kids engaged in that garden. And master gardeners are great at doing that. So our next slide here, 33, gives you just a brief list of things you could incorporate, lessons you could incorporate into the garden. So all the way from soils before maybe you even start the garden, indoors activities, you can bring soil into the classroom, have them search through it, look for worms, look for insects, really get them excited about soils, which really isn't an exciting topic. But that's something you start way at the beginning. Same with worms. And then as you're going through the garden, you can incorporate all of these other things. You can talk about what parts of the plant are we actually eating? Are we eating flowers? Are we eating stems? You can talk about insects and how they're pollinating the garden. Photosynthesis, all of the different processes that are going on inside the plant. Water cycles, lots of great activities with water cycles. Seeds, germination, tools, safety, all of these things you can really do quick and simple lessons out in the garden, which really helps get the kids engaged into that garden. Okay. And I'll share some resources for lessons here towards the end as well. Okay, our next slide here. Oh, it's in this next slide, actually. How handy is that? So a couple of lesson resources that you can use to get some ideas for how to get the kids involved in the garden. The Junior Master Gardener manual is an excellent source, and I know a lot of our offices have that already in their offices, or you can easily order that. Lots of great lessons, and it's divided into sections. So like if you need a lesson on worms, there's a worm section. So you can really choose based on what topic you want to talk about. The Junior Master Gardener Literature in the Garden is another great manual, which again emphasizes using books to get the kids engaged in the garden. So it'll give some examples of books and then some lessons to go along with those books. The I Think Green program is another great resource we have in Extension. It's a collaboration with a 4-H program where they've created activities in insects, butterflies, and worms. We've done some train the trainers in our units to teach these lessons to our master gardeners, and then they can go out and deliver them to youth throughout our whole area. So that's a great resource to us here at Extension. And then otherwise, Ag in the Classroom has a lot of great resources. If you go on their website or if you search for Ag in the Classroom activities, they have a ton of great lessons. And there's also lots of different books. The Grow Lab book and the Growing Classroom book are two that I have in my library, and they have a lot of great lessons inside them as well. So there's lots of online sources. There's also lots of great books that you can reference as well. Okay, next slide here, on to 35. A couple of other things to think about to get the youth engaged. One idea is to create kind of a garden club or a garden camp surrounding that garden. We've gotten a couple of schools started with school gardens over the past 2 years, and the ones that have been the most successful are the ones that have created kind of a garden club idea around the garden. So they'll have a garden club meet after school on a certain day of the week where we'll come in or other people will come in, give them a quick lesson, do some activities, and then help them kind of get involved in the garden. And then some of these over the summer, they've even created a summer kind of reading group. So a certain day of the week in the morning, there will be teachers there, there'll be master gardeners there. And the kids will actually come, the teachers will read them a book, and then our master gardeners will help them do a lesson, help them maintain the garden. So it's a great way to get them involved even through the summer by creating this kind of summer reading group. So it all goes back to kind of having those key people and making sure that people are actually kind of engaged in the garden. And a garden club is a great way to do that. Next slide here, or actually on the same slide here, just some ideas of a camp as opposed to a garden club. So maybe instead of having it one day a week throughout the summer, maybe you do it a little bit more intensive for maybe a whole week at a time. Just kind of depends what works with your schedule. So on to number 36 here. Another great activity to help get the kids engaged is to have them label what they're actually planting. So it's a great kind of crafty activity. They can create the markers out of whatever material you prefer, but then it's also a great educational material then. So every time the youth comes out, they'll be able to see and remember what they actually have planted. And it's great for the community too. Once they're going through the garden, they're getting that education as well. So it's a great educational source as well as to get the youth engaged. Next slide here. This I thought was a great idea, especially for a school garden. If it's something in a schoolyard setting where you're going to have maybe a whole class that's in charge of one particular raised bed or in one particular garden, instead of having, let's say, the third grade garden, the fourth grade garden, the fifth grade garden, think about maybe putting their class year on that garden so that they stay with that same garden until they've worked their way out of that school. So that way, that gives them the opportunity to, again, kind of take ownership of that one garden and maybe be able to do some maybe longer term projects in that garden as well, so that those kids aren't having to rotate to the fourth year garden, to the fifth grade garden, and so on. Again, really helps give them ownership into that. Next slide here, I'll wrap it up with some, again, tips for success. So some of these are ones that I have gleaned. I have to thank my program coordinators. I have a lot of excellent program coordinators in my unit, and they've done a lot of great youth work on their own, and they've given me a lot of these great tips for success as well. So I definitely have to thank them. Again, I'll emphasize finding those point people and making sure you educate them. So one thing that I do, my background is adult education, and that's kind of where I'm comfortable. So what I do a lot of times is I will provide the education to the teachers, to the parents, to the community members, anybody that wants to volunteer in that youth garden. I will help educate them on how to garden, how to grow things, how to harvest, so that they have that background knowledge. And then they can go out and be able to be successful in that garden and to be able to teach the youth from there. So even if you're not comfortable teaching kids, maybe that's just not your thing. That's not what it's all about. There's also a lot of education that can go into teaching those point people as well as help with designing. There's a lot of things that's involved with youth gardening that isn't necessarily directly teaching the youth, which I think is great because you can get a lot of different people involved. Okay, so those point people, like I said, Master Gardeners, we're here for education, so we can help train people, we can help teach the kids. Community garden members would be great point people for gardens. Local garden clubs, they may have volunteers that want to start some gardens. FFA and ag programs are a great resource. 4-H groups, church groups. So you can find these interested people just about anywhere. But the key is that you're finding those people to take kind of responsibility for that garden. So that's what the next slide here is. Again, finding those individuals who can be the point people, who are kind of the champions for the garden. That's going to set you up for the best success. And like I said, those point people are not us at Extension necessarily. We are there for the education to educate those point people so that they can be successful in their own adventures. Okay, on slide to 40 here. A couple of other ways to be successful. I mentioned with school gardens, it gets tricky because they're only in school for spring and fall pretty much. So a couple of other things you could think about to make sure that garden is utilized all season. You could possibly assign a family or have families sign up weekly to maintain that garden for the summer. That's a great way to keep the kids involved for the summer. You could possibly think about turning that garden into a community garden for the summer. So having people from the community be able to come in, utilize some of that garden space for the summer, so that it's not just sitting empty when the youth aren't there. And if youth are there, if you have that potential, funding is obviously always a difficulty with a lot of these gardens. So I've seen a couple of great garden examples where they've been able to get the youth involved in running a farm stand for the summer right on their garden location. Get the community involved, let the community know, and a lot of times they'll find that the community is very supportive. They'll come and they'll purchase produce, they'll purchase flowers from these gardens, and that's able to make the garden more sustainable. And it's also helped teaching the youth business skills and lots of other skills that go beyond just gardening. So that's another great thing there. Next slide. We've talked about size. Start small. Start with maybe one raised bed, and if that continues to go well, you can keep adding on. Make friends with the grounds people. That's always going to be very important, especially at a school, at a church, anywhere where you have maintenance staff that's sometimes maybe they need to unlock the water source for you. You want to make sure you pat your okay things with them. Make sure you talk with them. Make sure they're not going to mow off any portions of the garden. You really want to make sure you have good communication with them to make sure everything is successful. And then also, of course, connect with those local food pantries. If your garden is not one that is associated with a food pantry or is maybe on the food pantry grounds, definitely connect with those food pantries so that if there is excess produce, you have a place for that to go. Next slide. Then last tip is to definitely create community awareness. Obviously, your community is going to create, again, more garden champions, more support for the garden. They're also going to be great at keeping an eye on the garden. If it's an area where maybe vandalism is a concern, being able to have those people out there who can keep an eye on things and who can help kind of maintain things might be important depending on your location. So creating flyers, signage, news releases, making sure you publicize your successes that you're having in the garden so that the community is really aware of what is happening there. Next slide. So here's just an example again of what you could do to publicize that. So definitely at your garden, make sure you have good signage. If you have a name for the garden, let them know who's involved. And if it's an occasion where maybe you don't necessarily want the public to be harvesting things, that would be an important thing to let them know what's if the produce is utilized by the school or if it's utilized by the food pantry. So again, you can avoid some of that possibly, but making sure you have good signage so the public is really aware of what's going on. Okay. Next slide here, working with youth. So if you are one of those people who is comfortable working with youth, you want to actually do some of the teaching out in the youth garden. Again, some of the tips that have come from some of the programs that have happened in our units, we've found that dividing the kids up into groups is a great way to manage it, especially if you have a large group of youth that's going to be in the garden doing activities or doing weeding, whatever type of tasks. Dividing them up in groups is a lot more manageable. So that's where having more garden people, more volunteers is going to be helpful. So you can break those kids into small groups and you can set up stations. So if you have different activities that you want to do, set those up in stations and have the kids rotate through. So it's much more smaller groups, much easier to manage. Okay. And two, if you have an example where you have a small garden like that courtyard, it could possibly be that all of the kids are not going to fit out there at one time. So in that case, you may need to plan an indoor activity and have half of the group do that indoor activity and then rotate out to that outdoor activity, making sure every kid gets a chance to do every opportunity there. Okay, now I mentioned I'd share a couple of resources here. One resource I've put together is a school garden packet. I worked with the Farm to School program to put this together. It's available online, and it's great for those who are just wanting to start a school garden, maybe from the ground up. In the front of it, there's even a parent's toolkit. So if you are a parent or a volunteer that wants to start a community garden or a youth garden, it helps you figure out where to start, who do you talk to, and even how do you say it. If you're going against somebody who's maybe not quite so keen on the idea of a youth garden, it gives you some ideas of how to kind of go about that. And then after that, it goes through some gardening handouts. So I give you all that information about choosing your location, what can you grow in the early spring, early fall, and so on. And then in here, I also have a list of some of those other things to plant. So some of those unique varieties. And then I give you examples of what to do. I like potato cultivar all blue because they're blue colored potatoes. So that list is in this packet, as well as the list of theme gardens. So you're welcome to check that out and share with anybody who needs some resources. And of course, the Illinois Farm to School website is a great resource as well. This information is also on that website. Lots of great info. Okay, well, I'll wrap it up. Here's my contact information. Feel free to email me if you ever have any questions beyond today. I'm always happy to help. As usual, if the facilitators would report their numbers online to our usual site, that would be great. We're also going to try to do an evaluation for the Four Seasons series here. And as you know, usually all we get are the numbers of how many attended in each county. But what we'd really like to do is to send a follow-up evaluation so that we're able to actually see if any of you have put any of this into action, if you've actually made any of these changes. So we'd really appreciate it if any of the facilitators, the coordinators, who's ever hosting the sites today, if any of the participants are willing to provide their email, we would love if you could email those to me, and that would allow us to be able to follow up with you later. It'd just be a short survey, super fast, nothing complicated, but that would allow us to be able to plan this series better and see if there's any changes or additions we need to make to that. And as usual, you can report the numbers online, but the emails, we'd like to go straight to my email. And then I will finish it up with any questions anybody has. So either in the text box or you can shout them out as well.
Hey, Candice.
Yeah.
We have a question here in Boone. We're just wondering about the liability if somebody were to get hurt or anything within your gardens, maybe they're not part of your group or anything like that. Is there something that anyone needs to be concerned with?
Yeah, that I would check with your site on. So let's say you're going to do it at a school or you're going to do it at a church, whatever the site is. I would check to see what kind of liability coverage they have in that aspect. And then obviously, if it's a master gardener, we have our own kind of liability things. But I would probably check with the location that you're going to do that garden for that type of information to see what they're covered for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, hopefully that just means I covered everything and you didn't have any questions. I'll stick around a little bit longer if anybody does. Otherwise, thanks everybody for coming. Have a good rest of the day.